How cool wouldn't it be if a 2,000-year-old Bible text predicted the rise of the United States? It's a question a lot of people have. Is the United States in Bible prophecy? That's what we're going to explore in this episode. This is The Sandelin Show. If this is your first time here, we make videos that give you guidance for Christian living in everyday life. So if that is something that you're into, make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell. It helps you, it helps us. It's a great win-win, right? So we're gonna look at the last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation. Now let me know in the comments if you've heard of the book of Revelation before. We're gonna see that in chapter 13 of this book, it describes one of the powers that will play this major role in the end time before Jesus comes again. And this description that we get actually makes it very easy for us to identify who this is talking about. Perhaps the US? One thing that you need to know before looking into Revelation is that the prophecies in this book are often described in symbolic language. And it's actually really exciting to unlock those symbols and discover what it means. And the chapter starts by describing a beast that rises from the sea. Now this isn't the beast of our focus in this video, but we need to understand a bit about it for the rest to make sense. So bear with me. This beast isn't your typical zoo animal, so don't freak out here when you hear the description. This beast has 7 heads, 10 horns with crowns, and it's a combination of a leopard, a bear, and a lion. So here we can already tell that this is symbolic because such a creature doesn't exist, thank God. And this description actually points us very specifically to the prophecies that were written hundreds of years before John wrote the book of Revelation, and it's in the book of Daniel. And it's actually really cool to see how the prophecies in the book of Daniel and in Revelation, how they are kind of working together. They're very closely connected. In the book of Daniel, it describes in these prophecies a sequence of beasts coming up one after another out of the sea. And guess what those beasts are? A lion, a bear, a leopard, and then a beast with 10 horns. So you can clearly see the parallels. And these particular prophecies in the book of Daniel, they foretold long before these events took place that the Medo-Persian Empire would be the ones that would overthrow the Babylonian kingdom, which in turn would be overthrown by Greece, followed by Rome. But then prophecy tells us that rather than another power came that overthrew the Roman Empire, it actually tells us that this Roman power changes into a unique power. And we find between 10 to 15 identifying characteristics in both the book of Daniel and Revelation with which we can clearly identify this power as being the papacy, the Roman Catholic Church. When I first heard that, I actually got a bit upset. I was like, how can you say such a thing? And, especially if you're part of this church or when you hear it for the first time, it can be really confusing. Now, just to assure you that this isn't cancel culture or me hating on this specific church, I want you to know that all the reformers hundreds of years ago, many of whom belonged to the Catholic Church and they were priests, they already saw in the Bible, as they were looking at these identifiers, they were like, whoa, the papacy is actually described here. And this isn't talking about the people in the church. It talks about its teachings and traditions, and especially when it uses political power for religious matters. If you want to know more about this and look at these identifiers yourself, then you can click the card up there. And both Daniel and Revelation, they describe a time where this power, this church, where it ruled with both political and religious power for a time span of 1260 years. As we look back in history, we can see how this was fulfilled when the Catholic Church ruled with this kind of power between 538 and 1798, also known as the Dark Ages. It's a time where they killed millions and millions of Christians and persecuted basically anyone who didn't agree with their teachings. So now, as we know the context and the background, we will look a bit further down in chapter 13 of Revelation where it introduces a second beast. So with that history in mind, we'll be able to look and find 4 characteristics in verse 11 with which we can identify the second beast. Revelation 13 verse 11 says, "Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon." That was it. That was verse 11. Did you spot all the 4 characteristics? Let me know in the comments how many you found or you think you found. And the first clue we get in the first part, where it says, "Then I saw another beast coming up." So that's exactly what happened in the prophecies in Daniel, where a new power arises and it grows more powerful, and then it conquers the previous kingdom. So one beast comes, another goes. One beast comes, another goes. In this case, we see the first beast, the papacy that rose from the sea, was losing power over time. It was growing weaker. And then in 1798 was the final blow, when the Pope was taken captive and the church's political power was taken away. So this new nation would rise to power in the late 1700s. It would grow more and more powerful over time and then be firmly established as a world power by 1798, when the previous beast received a deadly wound, as Revelation calls it. So does that fit with the United States? Absolutely. The United States declared its independence in 1776, so late 1700s. It voted for the Constitution in 1787, adopted the Bill of Rights in 1791, so it grew more and more powerful in this time frame, and by the time 1798 came, the United States was definitely recognized as a world power. So that was number one. Now the second clue. Where did it rise up out of? Out of the earth. Now both the previous beast as well as the beast in Daniel, they all arose from the sea. What does that mean? Remember that this is symbolic language, but the Bible gives us the meanings of these symbols. We saw earlier that the Bible itself told us that beasts represented nations and kingdoms, and now, just a few chapters later in Revelation 17 verse 15, it tells us that the waters represent peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And also in Isaiah 17 verse 12 in the Old Testament, it likens the seas to being multitude of many peoples. And again, we get this confirmed by history as we see that these kingdoms, these beasts that rose from the sea, they all came to power in populated areas, where one kingdom warred against another established kingdom, defeated them and overtook their territory and cities and people. But unlike those kingdoms, this new kingdom didn't come from the sea. It came from the opposite. It came from the earth. In other words, this wasn't a power that overthrew the previous established kingdom and took over this populated area. No, this kingdom arose in a sparsely populated area. It was a new kingdom. Now, does that fit with the United States? Absolutely. This continent was sparsely populated in the beginning, and more people over time, they fled and moved from Europe across the ocean to this new land that would become the United States of America. And then we find our third and fourth identifiers in the description of what this beast looks like. It had two horns like a lamb. Now with all those previous beasts, just imagine walking down the street and there's a lion or a bear or a leopard or a seven-headed beast. What would you do when you see them? You run, right? That's scary. But would you do the same if you walk down the street and there comes a lamb? No, right? You wouldn't run. That's not scary. So not only was this kingdom different in where it rose to power, not the sea but the earth, but also its appearance was very different. A lamb is peaceable. You know, you have the expression being as innocent as a lamb. So it doesn't have these same warlike attributes that those other beasts had. And also the fact that it's not a sheep, it's not a mature animal, it's a lamb. Again, that suggests youthfulness. It's a new beginning. And again, that description fits really well with the original mindset of the people who came to this new land. Many of these people had fled from Europe, where through political powers the papacy was enforcing their teachings and traditions, stripping people from their religious and personal liberties. So America, this new land, was like a safe haven for political and religious refugees, where they could start new without being oppressed. And it's no surprise what the first thing on their mind was. What is the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights? That Congress makes no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting its free exercise. So unique to the United States was that from the start it was built on political and religious liberty. There was a separation by law between church and state. Civil liberty in the republican form of government, where the people were having the power rather than some king, and religious freedom in the form of Protestantism, where you had a church without a pope. So the United States was all about freedom. And that is what those two horns represent, which is the fourth identifier. Two unique, distinguishable features that within the same nation, within the same beast, there are two fundamental principles of republicanism and Protestantism, political and religious liberty. And interestingly enough, the book of Revelation refers to Jesus as being the lamb 28 times. So this nation being likened to a lamb would be Christ-like. It would be built on Christian principles, which makes sense because many of the pioneers, they were Christians. And in the first amendment, they captured the principle that Jesus taught in Mark 12, verse 17. Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Separation of church and state. Two principles within the same nation. And being built on this Christian principle of freedom for all, the United States, it flourished. It became the land of the free with the American dream, and everyone wants to move to the United States. So friends, those are the four characteristics that we have seen in this verse. And when you look at them like that, you know that there's only one that fits this description. There is no other nation or kingdom or government or world power that fits this description of the second beast. Without doubt, the only one that fits the second beast is the United States of America. But Bible prophecy doesn't only talk about the rise of the United States, it also talks about the future of the United States. Now verse 11 says, even though it started and it appeared Christ-like and innocent in the beginning, there will be a 180-degree turn where it will speak like a dragon. If you want to know what that means and what the dark future of the United States will be, then you don't want to miss this video. Before I see you there, make sure to share this video with at least one other person. Can you do that? All right, I'll see you in the next one. Maranatha.